A very good morning from all of us here at 5, where it's time to greet Monday with half an hour of the latest news, sport and weather in Sunrise.
Your country needs you. The army should have been called in earlier to fight foot and mouth.
Sectarian violence, tension in Belfast as a Catholic man is shot dead.
Pay as you play. Parents count the cost of the summer holidays.
He's on his way. Now it's down to Rio to finalise his deal with United.
And Ernie earns his Open title after a dramatic playoff with Newfield.
Sky News with Steve Dixon and Julie Etchingham.
Hello, good morning to you. The army should be called in immediately if there's another outbreak of foot and mouth disease. That's expected to be one of the recommendations of the official inquiry into the epidemic when it's published later today.
But it's understood the report will criticise ministers for not calling in the military sooner to oversee last year's emergency. The disaster cost £8 billion and the lives of millions of animals.
Sky's Di Harper has been to the Scottish borders, an area very badly hit by the outbreak.
Robin Spence has more than 800 cattle on his farm. There are no longer any sheep. They were all slaughtered last year because the farm was infected with foot and mouth disease. All his animals were killed. He's had to rebuild his stock.
The herd of animals we lost, the dairy cattle, was the herd my father started after foot and mouth in 1952. So the bloodlines we'd lost were, I would just about say, irreplaceable. We've tried to get some of the lines back, but that's very difficult.
The images of burning animal carcasses are still fresh in our minds. Around 7 million animals were slaughtered in Britain last year, costing billions of pounds. The government's mass slaughter policy was widely criticised. Many farmers favoured vaccination for those animals who weren't infected. At Longtown Market, where infected animals pass through, sheep are once again being sold at auction, but business is far from booming.
Longtown Mart got blamed for spreading foot and mouth simply because on the day that these animals came in from Hexham, they were then moved to various points throughout the country, and we were blamed for spreading it.
Tourism too paid a heavy price. People stayed away from infected areas, which left hotels and guest houses empty.
It was very disastrous. I reckon we were down about 30%. That's from the February. Things started picking up again in August when the foot and mouth got this all clear. But before that, it was very devastating.
An inquiry team headed by Dr. Ian Anderson toured many of the areas affected by foot and mouth.
Life on both sides of the border is now pretty much back to normal. But no one will ever forget the scale of the devastation caused by foot and mouth. Di Harper, Sky News, in the Scottish borders.
Tension is high in Belfast after a series of shootings which left one man dead and several others wounded. The man who died is thought to have been killed in a drive-by shooting. The Loyalists and Republicans have blamed each other for the fresh outbreak of violence.
A young Catholic man lies dead on a road in North Belfast, picked at random by a hate-filled Loyalist gang. Their reason for murder: to avenge a shooting earlier in the day in which a young Protestant man was injured.
There are people in these communities who know who did this. That there is no doubt about that someone somewhere knows who did this, and I would appeal to anyone who has information to please come forward. And secondly, to all the community leaders out there and all the people who have any influence, I would ask them to get everybody together and get this problem sorted out, because when a 12-year-old at one side of Belfast throws a stone, someone on the other side of Belfast ends up being killed, and sometime, somewhere, this has to stop.
This shooting was one of several carried out by Loyalists in various parts of North Belfast last night. Although gunmen fired on a number of would-be victims in the attacks, this was the only death. Others were injured but not seriously. Earlier in the evening, a Republican gunman shot and seriously injured a Protestant man following trouble in the Ardoyne area. For several days now, the problems in Northern Ireland's peace process have spilled out onto the streets of North Belfast. Now the hit has cost this young man his life. Liam Cray, Sky News, North Belfast.
A look at some home news in brief now.
And air traffic controllers at Swanwick ordered 2 planes to take immediate avoiding action after flying too close to each other. It's been revealed a British Airways flight from Manchester to Paris and a Swiss-bound flight from London City Airport came within 3.6 miles of each other while flying over Brighton late last week. The minimum allowed distance is 5 miles. A spokesman for the National Air Traffic Services said at no time was passenger safety compromised.
The Prime Minister has come under fire from former Labour leader Michael Foot. In an interview with the Independent newspaper, Mr Foot described Tony Blair's presidential style of leadership as foolish. He's also described Mr Blair's ally Peter Mandelson as quite odious for declaring he's not a quitter during his re-election speech.
And the Duke of York has been let off without being fined after being caught speeding. Prince Andrew was stopped near Heathrow Airport, allegedly doing 60 miles an hour in a 40-mile-an-hour zone. A spokesman for the Metropolitan Police confirmed the car was stopped for speeding, but no further action was taken after the occupant was spoken to.
New nurses and doctors may have to undergo HIV tests if the Department of Health proposals are taken up. It follows fears that up to 700 infected nursing staff were recruited into Britain last year, many from African countries where AIDS has reached epidemic proportions.
At the moment, healthcare workers are under no obligation to take an HIV test, whether they've been recruited here or abroad. But the government's considering taking the dramatic step of AIDS screening all new recruits, after figures show more than 700 nurses and doctors could be carrying the virus. Britain employs thousands of foreign health workers, many from Africa, where HIV cases have reached epidemic proportions. Last year, 2,114 recruits came from South Africa, where 1 in 5 are infected with HIV. Nearly 500 nurses came from Zimbabwe, where 1 in 3 carry the virus, and 100 from Botswana. The statistic there is 2 in 5. The scale of the problem here emerged after Wolverhampton Health Authority found last year that 10 workers were HIV positive. A national review was set up to look into the option of testing. AIDS charities say it could lead to discrimination. There's no evidence that an infected health worker is a risk to their patient, although it can restrict the work they're allowed to do. But there's also the issue of treatment. In countries like Africa, anti-HIV drugs are very expensive. It's likely those infected would want to stay and be treated here. The Department of Health said ministers have yet to make a decision and are still looking at the review recommendations. But if they do decide to go ahead with testing, the question is, why did they wait so long when thousands of health workers have been recruited from countries rife with AIDS for years? Catherine Rhodes, Sky News at the Department of Health.
Lord Archer will launch his bid for freedom today, a year after he was jailed for perjury and perverting the course of justice.
The former Tory party deputy chairman will ask the High Court for permission to appeal against his sentence and conviction.
Lord Archer was jailed for 4 years for perjury and perverting the course of justice in July 2001. The charges at his trial at the Old Bailey related to his successful 1987 libel case against the Daily Star. He won £500,000 in damages then, after the newspaper claimed he slept with prostitute Monica Coughlin. But it was later alleged that Archer wasn't telling the truth and he was soon back in the courtroom. Once there, he denied he'd used a false diary and concocted a bogus story to fend off the Daily Star's allegations. The jury didn't agree, though. It reached a unanimous verdict, finding him guilty of 2 counts of perverting the course of justice and 2 of perjury. The trial judge told Archer, "These charges represent as serious an offence of perjury as I've had experience of and have been able to find in the books." He sentenced the millionaire novelist to 4 years in jail. Today, Archer's legal team will be renewing an application to appeal against the conviction on the grounds that it's unsafe. His lawyers are also expected to argue that lesser sentences have been given in similar cases. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
Let's have a look at some international news in brief now.
And US telecoms giant WorldCom has filed for bankruptcy protection from its creditors. With debts of $30 billion, it's America's biggest corporate collapse. The company is also embroiled in a massive accounting scandal. WorldCom, which says it expects to emerge from bankruptcy protection in a year, employs 85,000 people in 65 countries.
The foreign ministers of Spain and Morocco meet face-to-face today to try to confirm a deal over the uninhabited island of Perejil. Agreement over the dispute was reached after mediation by the United States. Both sides came close to armed conflict after Moroccan troops occupied the island 11 days ago. They were ousted by Spanish soldiers after a bloodless raid.
Well, the Commonwealth Games begin here in Britain this week, but in America they come with an event that's not quite so serious. For starters, competitors in the Bub Olympics have to weigh at least 18 stone, and they probably have to be a touch mad too. That's because the events include belly flopping, where the best stomach wins. Then there's spam carving. Just wait for that chap to get out of the water, perhaps. And the frozen wet t-shirt contest, and following a bottle full of scalding hot chilli sauce.
Well, the school holidays are here, which is marvellous, of course, for school children, but for many parents, it can be a nightmare. Keeping the children occupied during the summer break can be expensive too, up to £140 a week per child. That's according to a survey by the Daycare Trust charity.
Soaking up the sun on the beach may be every parent's dream way of passing the summer with their children. But for those who work, the school holidays mean looking for temporary childcare for up to 6 weeks. The charity Daycare Trust found that the most expensive childcare schemes surveyed cost £140 per child per week. This is over twice the national average of around £60 a week. But parents have been warned there are only enough places for 6% of school-aged children. It means a family with 3 children, paying the cheapest price, would spend over £1,000 over the summer on childcare. The difficulty finding facilities like these is most acute in rural areas, especially Yorkshire, with those with no family or friends nearby the worst affected. And perhaps surprisingly, the cheapest weekly care was found in inner-city London. It's thought around a quarter of all parents, unable to find or afford childcare, are forced to take the whole summer off work, so having to find something to occupy both themselves and their child until the school term begins in September. Jane Secker, Sky News.
Sky News crew has been detained in China while covering a story linked to the destruction of Beijing's traditional hutong dwellings. It's thought to suggest that China's communist government is becoming increasingly sensitive to a downturn in the economy following a drive for reform.
Daily life as it has been for centuries, living cheek by jowl in the hutongs, Beijing's warren of ancient courtyard homes, what the Chinese people regard as a cultural masterpiece. For tens of thousands of these ancient communities across the capital, the writings on the wall, quite literally. Destined for demolition, it's the flip side of China's building boom. Hutongs hurriedly making way for glitzy new shops and offices, the very cutting edge of the communist government's dash for capitalism. Many, though, are appalled.
It's like a Chinese meal. We shouldn't throw away our traditional noodles and have McDonald's instead.
To those resident in the fast-disappearing hutongs, that's exactly how it seems, after a lifetime evicted with minimal compensation.
Ordinary people should be allowed to live here. Courtyards were built for the ordinary people.
Brave words indeed in China, where any dissent is brutally crushed. Indeed, the police soon forced their way into the home of Chen Guiqi, and the Sky News crew was forcibly detained. Our crime? Listening to the fears of people caught in a tide of change. China's communist rulers bent on economic reform, displaying still their familiar instincts for repression. Richard Bestick, Sky News, Beijing.
Let's have a look at the weather forecast this morning. Here's Jo.
Good morning. Well, there's nothing staggeringly brilliant about today, and there is some rain around. That is moving away from eastern parts of Scotland this morning. The picture at 9 o'clock, that's well away into the North Sea. Just perhaps a few showers skirting down North Sea coasts. The best of any brightness will be found in the southeast of England and also the southwest. There could be a few glimmers of brightness here and there. Rather cloudy in Ireland with some rain coming in later for this evening. That's it for now.
Joanna, thanks very much indeed. Let's have a look at some business news now. And dealers on both sides of the Atlantic will be watching the markets nervously this morning as another week's trading gets underway. International markets have been on a 2-month slump that has wiped up to a quarter of the value of the world's main stock markets. As ever, remember that you can tell us what you think about any of today's stories. Drop us an email. news@sky.com is our address, news@sky.com. And viewers on Sky Digital can email us directly from their television. All you have to do is press the red button on your digital remote control and select email. We're watching Sky News. Let's have a look at the top stories for you now this morning. And the army should be called in immediately if there's another outbreak of foot and mouth disease. That's expected to be one of the recommendations of the official inquiry into the epidemic when it's published later on today. Tension is high in Belfast after a series of shootings which left one man dead and several others wounded. Loyalists and Republicans have blamed each other for the fresh outbreak of violence. And Rio Ferdinand is set to negotiate his salary and conditions today before signing for Manchester United in a deal that will make him the most expensive British football player ever. But more on that now, and the transfer fee for Rio will be around £30 million. But where does that leave him in the global superstar transfer league? Well, Julie has more at the Newswall.
It's the second time Rio Ferdinand has become the world's most expensive defender. The first was 2 years ago when Leeds United bought him from West Ham for £18.5 million. Now, at the age of 23 and at a cost of £30 million, he's joined the world's elite league. Top of that table is the most expensive player on earth. France's Zinedine Zidane cost Real Madrid £46.5 million. Luis Figo is next, £37 million, again to join Real Madrid. Ferdinand's deal makes him the 6th biggest transfer of all time. But in British terms, he's the most expensive, and he's joining a club that leads the way in record-breaking signings. Manchester United. Who else? New teammate and Argentinian captain Juan Sebastian Veron was the former British transfer record holder at £28.1 million. Before that, it was Ruud van Nistelrooy's arrival at Old Trafford that set the standard with a £19 million price tag. Ferdinand's deal is double the £15 million Newcastle paid Blackburn Rovers to bring Alan Shearer back to his hometown club in 1996, then Britain's most expensive player. It all seems a long way from one of the landmark transfers, Britain's first £1 million player. That's what Nottingham Forest paid for Trevor Francis back in 1979. These days, of course, £1 million players appear to be 10 a penny in the Premiership. But with clubs groaning under debt as a result of spiralling player costs, Leeds themselves are reportedly £77 million in the red. Some are saying that Rio's record could be the peak for an industry now trying to balance its books instead of breaking the bank.
Julie, thanks very much indeed. Well, coming up after the break, all the sport with Charlie, including the very latest on Rio and the Els victory in the Open, plus on the button, why Jensen's on the move again in Formula One.
For every crime,
the shooter was standing right there.
There is an investigation. But without evidence,
police, open up!
there's no trial.
Prosecuting her killer is our responsibility.
No sentence.
She's dead, isn't she?
No justice.
Oh, please don't tell me, man. Put the gun down.
Justice. We'll show you justice.
No, I don't want to die.
Like this. Concentrate on what cannot lie. The evidence.
Crime scene investigation and Law and Order. Saturday nights on Channel 5.
No, I don't want to die.
Oh, hi! I'm this
visiting my cousin and his gang in the big city. Say hello, Rocky.
Hello, Rocky. Yeah, hi, people. Coco's hanging out with me and the gang because he can handle the crunch. New Kellogg's Cocoa Pops Crunches. Chunky, chocolatey nuggets for a massive chocolatey crunch. But not everyone can handle the crunch.
What are they so ratty about?
Cocoa Pops Crunches, can you handle the crunch? Fashion photo Barbie.
Alter the lens, Barbie. You strike a pose.
Shirt, skirt, crop top, chic capri, smile please, crispy pose.
Hey, girlfriend. Way to move.
Fashion photo Barbie.
Meet the little star with big dreams.
You're going to love it.
Angelina Ballerina, Rose Fairy Princess. Brand new to own on video.
Life. It's all about opinions.
There's hostility towards single
Politics
parents.
should be left to the politicians.
The education system in this country is based on hypocrisy.
Pop stars have no place in politics. The right stuff should be on longer for everyone to have their say.
Should have a longer time slot.
The Right Stuff with 50% extra talk time all this week from 10 on Channel 5.
Time for all the sport now. Here's Charlie.
Julie, thanks very much. Good morning to you. Leeds fans have given their backing to chairman Peter Ridsdale after he agreed to sell Rio Ferdinand to Manchester United for £30 million. Ferdinand has now to agree personal terms and pass a medical for the deal to be completed.
So for the second time in recent years, Leeds agreed to sell their star player to their arch rivals. The fee is a world record for a defender and fully justified according to someone who spotted Ferdinand's potential a long time ago.
He's been outstanding this season, and his England performances in the World Cup were world class. And I met him when he was 13 years of age as a midfield player playing over in Bexley Heath, and he was always going to be a great player, and really he's just proved that now.
The amount of money involved and the weight of expectation might seem daunting, but a former Man United player believes Ferdinand has the strength of character to deliver the goods at Old Trafford.
Yeah, you have to be a certain type of player to play at Old Trafford. You have to have character most of all, and I think Rio does have that. He's shown with his move from West Ham to Leeds that he can carry it off. It's a massive stage for him, and it is a stage where he can improve immensely.
It's also interesting to find out how other centre-halves rate the player who in sheer monetary terms must be among the very best in the world.
I think, of course, it's an extraordinary amount of money to pay for a player, but Rio is at the moment one of the best centre-half in Europe, in the world, and he proved it at the World Cup. So, you know, but it's the going rate at the moment.
Is he the best centre-half in the world?
He's got to be definitely in the top 5.
The hard work is not yet over for the negotiators. Personal terms must be agreed between Ferdinand and Manchester United, and the player must of course pass a medical. But if all goes to plan, he could be paraded at Old Trafford in midweek. Phil Edwards, Sky News.
Ernie Els called it a dream come true after winning the Open Championship at Muirfield in the most dramatic of circumstances. He triumphed in a sudden death playoff against the Frenchman Thomas Lavey. 2 Australians, Stuart Appleby and Steve Elkington, fell by the wayside in the first 4-hole playoff after all 4 men finished 6 under par for 72 holes.
Twice the runner-up in the Open, Ernie Els finally has his hands on the claret jug. But the South African certainly did things the hard way. It was on the 3rd visit of the day to the 18th green and on the first hole of a sudden death playoff with Frenchman Thomas Lavey when Els finally put his fans out of their misery. The Big Easy had started the final day at Muirfield with a 2-shot lead and seemed to be cruising, stretching his advantage at one point to 3 shots in excellent conditions. But a double bogey at the par 3 16th saw his lead slip, and the former US Open champion headed into a 4-way playoff with the Frenchman and Australians Stuart Appleby and Steve Elkington. The Aussies, though, faltered on the final green of the 4 extra holes, leaving Els and Lavey to face the first sudden death playoff in 131 years of Open history. Earlier, Englishman Gary Evans had looked on course for an historic victory, which would have been his first in 11 years on the European Tour. Evans shot a 6 under par 65, showing the best round of the day, and for a while enjoying a clubhouse lead. The Sussex golfer, though, had to settle for a share of 5th, with Irishman Porrick Harrington and Japan's Shigeki Maruyama.
But the day was to belong to Ernie Els, and he was left to celebrate a third major title and to take home a cheque for £700,000. Tony Campbell, Sky News.
Another race, another win and another record for Michael Schumacher. He's now the quickest ever championship. His win at Magny-Cours yesterday meant the German lifted the driver's title with 6 races still to go this season. His 5th world title, equalling the number won by Juan Manuel Fangio of Brazil in the 1950s. He's on 96 points, 62 ahead of Juan Pablo Montoya.
It's probably wrong to mention names because we are so many of us that I just say that I really love all these guys because we have such a great relationship and it's fantastic to achieve this all together. I just, yeah, thank you is very small words for what you have done for me. Thank you very much.
Jenson Button's expected to confirm later today that he'll be driving for BAR next season. Button's replacing Frenchman Olivier Panis as teammate to former world champion Jacques Villeneuve. It'll be Button's 3rd team in 4 seasons after Renault confirmed his departure last week, ending a 2-year loan deal from Williams. The Leeds Rhinos are closing in on a top 3 place in the Super League. The Rhinos are just a point behind Wigan after a 38-10 win at Halifax. Elsewhere, there was a win for Warrington against Salford, whilst Wakefield drew 22-all with Widnes. Close first half at the Shea finished with the score 10-all, but Leeds proved too strong after the break. They wrapped up the win with 3 second-half tries. This one from winger Francis Cummins. That's it for the moment. More sport at 10 to. Now let's check on the weather.
Sky News weather, sponsored by Ryanair.com, the low fares airline.
Hello there. Well, there's some lovely sunshine across London at the moment, but there is quite a bit of cloud about elsewhere. The main story is the rain moving away from eastern parts of Scotland this morning, and generally just rather a lot of cloud tumbling in from the Atlantic. There will be some glimmers of brightness here and there with the best of the sunshine to the southeastern counties and also for the southwest as well. Highs-wise, nothing staggering, perhaps up to 23 degrees in London and near average for everywhere else. That's it.
Sky News weather, sponsored by Ryanair.com, the low fares airline.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up later on this morning, the cost of childcare. A survey shows working parents may have to pay as much as £140 a week.